Hey guys, I'm Jeremy, and I figured I'd tell you about my experience coming home in the last year. Because for the most part, I've been living abroad the last 15 years or so. Mostly in China and Taiwan, but a couple other places as well. So in this video, I'll go into the story of me living abroad, and then my expectations of coming home and the culture shock, and some advice I could give you, like what I thought it would be like and what it turned out to be in the last year. Because it was quite a few surprises and twists and turns this year since I've come back. I really didn't expect it to be so tumultuous. And then I'll give you a few other things to consider. Like, I didn't think that, being abroad would be a big deal on my credit history, but obviously it is. You've been gone 15 years, and so you have no driving history, basically. You have no credit history, so you can't even get a credit card easily. And so, anyway, there's a lot of things to consider. So if you've been living abroad for many years, this video might help you. You can see what you might expect when you come back. And even if you don't plan to come back, you might have to come back to your home country, even if you don't expect it. Like, I had half of my friends in China during the pandemic, and right when it broke out, they went traveling. They assumed they'd be able to get back, and then China closed its doors for almost 3 years. So all of those people had to start their lives unexpectedly back in their home country. And there's other reasons why you might have to go back home. Maybe your business fails abroad, or, the financial situation changes, or, you end up divorcing your wife or something like that. So you really have to be prepared for heading back. I know even 2 years ago, if you would have asked me if I was leaving China, I would have been like, no, I'm going to be here forever, like doing these tours. Or at least I would have been there for a few more years, getting it to grow even more and then return or whatever. But life has a lot of unexpected turns. And also, if you're considering going abroad, I would still encourage you to, but there's some concerns you're going to have coming back. I remember before I went traveling in 2006, I was talking to one of my friends or something, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to go on a long bike trip like you or travel around the world for many years, but then I'm financially going to have problems. Like, I won't have a house, I won't have a good job, and all this kind of stuff. And it is probably going to be a problem, which is the situation I'm in now, is definitely not the best financial situation. So here's my story about living abroad and the culture shock coming home. So I've really had a pretty adventurous 25 years for the most part. When I was 18, I went in the Army 4 years. I was a paratrooper at Fort Bragg, and I got out the year September 11th happened. So that went from being, basically like a regular 4-year service to I was totally worried when I was in college after that I'd be called back to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. Luckily, I didn't, but it definitely could have been the case. So that was kind of a pretty crazy time. And when I got out of the Army, I hiked the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. I traveled in Europe and New Zealand, and I did a bike trip across the states. And while I was in college getting a sociology degree and finishing up, I had heard about other people who had did bike trips around the world, so I started looking into that. So after I graduated college, I worked in Asheville for about 6 months with autistic kids, and then I was like, I'm going to sell everything and do this bike trip around the world. And I might even live abroad, because initially I was going to do just 1 year. I was like, maybe I'll live abroad a few years. And little did I know my fate would kind of take me more in the direction of living abroad a long time. And so I started in 2006 in Thailand, went through Southeast Asia, and I was in China right near the border of Tibet and Shangri-La. And an SUV hit me head on, and I broke my femur, my face broke the windshield, and so I was in a hospital there for a month. I've made a video about that you can check out. And I ended up living in China for a year and a half, which I obviously totally didn't anticipate that. I was going to be a high school history teacher anyway, so it wasn't a big stretch to teach English. And so it was cool. I mean, I really did like Kunming. It was a great experience. After I recovered, I finally continued through Tibet, and I ended up staying in Nepal through winter because you can't get through Pakistan to China. And so after the winter, I left Nepal after working there at a language consultancy, and I went through Central Asia, and then I was in Armenia for a couple months, and I was trying to make it teaching English, but I was like, it's too expensive here for what I get paid. It's not going to work. So after 3 years, I finally came back around Christmas. I guess it was 2009 or so. And I would work for a few months in Buffalo. And I also considered maybe living longer term, but my main idea was to try to go commercial fishing that next summer. And then I would finish the bike trip, by going through parts of the Middle East, Africa, and South America. So I actually moved in with my high school buddy in Tonawanda, kind of just north of Buffalo in the suburbs there. And so this was basically, I'd been gone from Buffalo for about 11 years at that point. I was in the military and then I was traveling. And then the 3 years prior to that, I was mostly in China and traveling on bike across Asia. So the first thing was that I obviously felt really out of place. So I walked into like restaurants and I was even like at first pointing at the signs for the food because that's what I had been doing traveling. Like no one knew English, right? Also, the people around me could speak English, right? Of course. And so when I'm abroad in all these different countries, I just totally zoned out. Like, I don't try to listen to what anyone's talking about because I can't understand the language. So that was a little overwhelming that you can actually understand what everyone says around you. So the first big difference when you get back home compared to either traveling or living abroad is that the social scene is going to be totally different. Like, when you're in China and these different places, everyone else is adventure traveling and they're interested in different cultures and different things. When you're coming back to, Buffalo, New York, I mean, you will meet some people that are like, cool, you biked around the world, you lived in China, and you could talk for an hour about it. But most people aren't really interested in those kinds of places, to be honest. I mean, maybe even like Europe or other Western countries people might be more interested in. But most people aren't like, wow, India and China and Kyrgyzstan. So I would be talking to people and telling them about like my bike experience and stuff. And people generally, are like, oh, that's cool. But I'm not making like any emotional connection with anyone to like make friends because it's just bizarre to people. Most people are interested in like the local sports teams and things like that. So that was really another big culture shock. And I think, of course, I could have tried to not talk about that kind of stuff and, talked about more local things. But I also knew I was traveling again anyway, so I didn't really put too much of an effort into that. I was like, if I meet some cool people that are into that, great. If not, no big deal. I did go on like couch surfing or some groups to like meet some like, foreign people living in Buffalo from a few different countries. And so I had some kind of like international group and some other friends, but not really too eventful that few months I was home. I didn't even have a car, so I worked at like a local bank and I knew I was kind of leaving, so I definitely felt really out of place. So I went up to Alaska and went fishing. It didn't go terribly, but it didn't go great. But I got a few $1,000s, enough to do a little bit of the Middle East, Africa, and South America. I did maybe like 2 months in each region there. And then I went back to Alaska again, and then I went to Taiwan to live. Because I had planned, after living in China, I was like, I should try another city that's a little more developed. And I really liked Taiwan. I taught there for a year, and I got my master's degree there. It was a great experience. That's when I started actually hosting biking and hiking trips on the weekends, mostly biking. And that was a good experience. I probably should have stayed there. And I ended up going back to China, and I was hoping to actually do like a PhD after I finished my master's. And I was actually going to plan to go, either back home or to other countries and be a professor in that aspect. And so I didn't get funding for a PhD, so I was like, I guess I won't do it. And I had worked for a few years at universities in China, and it was cool. But I thought maybe then, since I'm not going to continue with the education thing, I'll go and just continue to do the tours because I like doing it. I knew Western China more than, most local people. I had biked and motorcycled all of these different areas. And then later I got back into hiking again. And so everything was going great, but I started really only a couple of years before COVID. So by the time it was going pretty well, COVID hit. And ironically, I did great through COVID. I mean, I had busloads of people all the time, the whole time. But it was so difficult to get hotels. People would show up with hazmat suits, or I wouldn't be able to get a room because I'm a foreigner. Because, of course, everyone in America was blaming China. Well, everyone in China blamed the foreigners, right? It came from America. They blamed it on, like, the Wuhan games and stuff. So I was sticking it out, and I thought it would be okay. Eventually, China would open, and it would be fine. But China had just not grown to be what most of us hoped it would be. I didn't think it was going to open and be like a democracy and be like a Western country. But I didn't think it was going to be like a rich version of North Korea either. And that's basically the direction it went in. And obviously Xi Jinping's there for life, so it's not like going to get more open. And so I finally decided I would have to leave. And the other big straw that broke the camel's back is that I was affiliated with another company just on paper so I could do tours, and it was like, at least I was on paper for that aspect, that I was like legally under a company doing tours. And part of that is that in case someone's hurt or dies or sues me, they could sue that company. So they needed 13,000 US dollars in an account. It's my money, but it's just there if I do the wrong thing or if someone gets hurt. And of course they stole that money. Right? Yeah. And so that was another big chunk of change, not just in my savings, but if I was still interested in not just leaving China, but maybe going to the Balkans or Latin America, like Peru or something. And I was like, it'll be cheaper to start over there. And so that was a huge blow for me. That was just devastating. I had to pay a lawyer a couple $1,000s to try to get my money back. And of course I did win the case a couple months ago, but they didn't enforce, the ruling to get back my money. And she's just going to say she doesn't have it, right? So it's just total BS. I should have never did any business in China. This happens all the time. I was on my route to do my own visa as my own wholly owned foreign enterprise, but it's 50,000 US dollars for that deposit. And so I was like, wow, that's going to take me, 2 or 3 more years to get there. So I was like, I just have to trust one Chinese person for 2 or 3 years to not steal my money. And that is not going to happen. I'll tell you that much. I have another video. You can see the story behind that if you want. So just before 2022, it was around Thanksgiving, and I knew I was going to have to leave China, and I would leave in about, 6 months from them, 6-7 months. And so I was pretty optimistic about like, I'll just find a remote job. And like, even if I don't do tours, like I'll get a remote job and then I could, live in the Balkans or go to Mexico or Colombia. And so I started off on that route for, 6 months or so. And that's actually right around the time I started taking YouTube more seriously, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But I was like, YouTube could help, whether I do tours or whether people are just interested in my travels or stories. And so I started looking for many different types of jobs, whether it was transcription, teaching English online. Of course, I don't have any like amazing IT skills or anything, so I wouldn't be able to get like web development or any like really good paying job. But I was just looking for like $10, $20 an hour jobs, and that didn't really work out that well. So by the time I came back to the US, I got to Buffalo in June last year of 2022. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I just started looking for jobs online still, and then I started looking at Buffalo and Cleveland, because in Cleveland is where one of my best friend Eric lives, and he's got a good size house, and he's single there. And so he's got an extra room. I could crash share and try to look for something in Cleveland or even in Buffalo. But the problem with Buffalo is that even my dad doesn't want me around. Like, the house is small, and my sister's there a lot too, and it's just like I would have to get my own place really soon. So I figured I might have a little more time in Cleveland, and I could also do a little electrical with him there because I know the basics and he's got some extra work. And so the only thing I really came up with was I did get a job with an insurance company, selling like life insurance. And I started to study for the exam for New York to be an insurance agent. And I figured it would be like the best job in the world, but I was like, whatever, I'll try it, right? I haven't had any job offers, so I'll go for it. And I was doing some research as I was studying the first few days, and it was like, and basically what it really turns out to being is that like you're calling like 100 people a day, and you're telling them about a product they already bought, like maybe it's like a safety kit or a safety seat for the car or something, and you tell them about that, and you have to memorize this whole speech, and then at the end you do like a bait and switch and try to sell them like life insurance. And of course, 99% of the people aren't going to get it. So you only have like this 1% of some like, old lady that might get the insurance. And I was like, I'm not doing a job where I just like call people 500-600 times a week. I was like, nah, that's not going to work. So at the same time, I was going to come out to Colorado in August anyway. So I kind of just hung out in Buffalo and Cleveland, went down to Virginia to see my buddy's place in July. And then I flew out to Colorado in August. And my buddy Eric and Jeff joined me, and my sister lives in south of Denver in a place called Parker with her boyfriend and their 2 dogs. And so at that point I was like, I might still do tours, but it wasn't like I was set on it or anything. I'd already pretty much given up the idea because my dad had actually mentioned he would give his van to me if I came back to the States and I could start doing tours that way. But even without a lot of good funding, I was pretty discouraged. And so I did a couple hikes with my friends and camping, And then I checked out a few other areas and I was like, the fire was back into me. I was like, you know what? I want to do these tours. Whether I have to get a van of my own or get my dad's van, like, this place is awesome. Colorado's cool. Like, I could live in Cleveland or Buffalo and maybe I could even do tours to Niagara Falls or something, but nothing up there would be as cool for outdoors. And I didn't have a job anyway, so I was like, why don't I just create my own job? I know how to make the products online. I know how to do this. I've already done it for a few years. I started making the website. And my dad mentioned he would give me the van, but the problem is that because of the supply chain issues, he couldn't get a new car. And if he doesn't have a new car, I'm not getting the van. And so they told him he would get his new car around Labor Day at the beginning of September. And so I flew back around that weekend. And then they're like, oh, sorry, the van's not here. It might come next week or it might be 6 months. And I was like, shit. I was like, I want to get back to Colorado. Like, summer's already over. There's only a couple more months left. The leaves are going to change, and then by November, it's going to get cold. And I assume, to be honest, like, there wouldn't be any tours in winter, which luckily there was some tours. It does slow down, but there are some people that want to go snowshoeing and stuff. But, you know, I was definitely in a hurry to get back. I want to start making money. I want to get this business going because it's going to take a long time. And so my dad ended up actually getting like a new used car. I got the van. I came out at the end of September. All of October, I searched around the state and I looked for, you know, the cool places and made some products. And then November, I was slammed. Like, for instance, I didn't know Pikes Peak was open all winter. I was like, I assume that closed just like most of the places in, like, you know, the end of October when it starts snowing up at high elevations. And so I had at least 10 trips to Pikes Peak alone, in addition to the other hikes and going to Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I was super optimistic. I mean, I was busy 3, 4, 5 days a week right out of the gate. And then I got some bad news in December. I was actually taking an Indian guy out for a week, and it was right around Christmas, and I got an email from one of the other big tour companies. I see you're selling tours. Do you have a public utility number? And I was like, no, what's that? And she's like, you need to have a public utility number. And she's like, you don't have that, so you need to take off like your tours to popular tourist areas, which is like Rocky Mountain National Park and Pikes Peak. She didn't care about the other like snowshoeing or other hikes I had or whatever. And so I did that because I was worried about getting sued. And she said, good luck applying because you're going to have these companies block you. And 4 companies did. I applied, and a month later, by the end of January, not just her, but 3 other companies blocked my application to be able to do tours in Colorado. So I'll make another video about the whole transportation thing, and because people should know about this. I get people all the time, they'll be like, oh, I'd like to do a tour guide agency. I had no idea that the existing companies have like monopoly rules with the government. So yeah, I had a hearing 3 weeks ago that was about 3 hours long. I had written a 30-page document, and I basically have to prove why it's in the public good for me to do tours, how the existing companies are not sufficient enough, and how I'm managerially fit to be able to run a company. So absolutely 100% bullshit. But this is, you know, the unfortunate thing. These rules came out, you know, 100 years ago when taxis got a monopoly in many cities. And of course, Uber and Lyft came in. And so you think that battle was over because Uber and Lyft destroyed the taxi industry. But of course, they made new laws for Uber and Lyft. And then they keep these existing laws for like the medium fish to eat the little fish like me. So keep one dude in a minivan from making a living, right? It's just total bullshit. So obviously a huge disappointment. I don't know the outcome yet. I probably will later this summer. But it severely hurt my business because 80% of the people want to go to like Pikes Peak and Rocky Mountain National Park. So if I'm not going to any tourist places, then this is a huge setback to my potential profit. So right around that time when I got that news, ironically, like that day, like around mid-December, I was actually looking at an apartment. And I was about to get this one. It was like a downstairs one, I guess kind of near 5 Points where I'm at now. And I was like, shit, there goes my new apartment. You know, I'd been staying with my sister and her boyfriend for a few weeks at that point. And I was like, all right, cool, I'm moving out. Things are going good. And it's like I just went from, you know, 4 or 5 days a week to doing tours to like once a week. So then I had to do Lyft and Uber, which that sucks. You make a couple $100 a day and then your car gets run down. And then I finally was able to do substitute teaching for like only 150 a day. But that took like 3 months because you have to get the fingerprints and all this paperwork that takes forever. So I finally did get a job teaching English in the evening from 5 to 9:30 p.m. to adults. And that's been pretty cool. They're mostly like Latino and a few other countries. And at least I have a steady income. And it's not like I had to train so hard to do that job. Obviously, I've been doing that for a long time. And so I was just trying to get on my feet. And then, of course, I get, my legs knocked out for me around Christmas. And now I finally got my own place last week. And I'm still in an uncertainty is, can I actually do tours to the full potential? Because there is another permit I could do, like to off-road places, which are where many of the hikes and biking trips I might do. But if you can't go to tourist places, like you're taking out 75% of your potential income. And so now I'll go into some of the expectations I had before I got back to the U.S. while I was still in China, some of the major culture shocks, and some advice I could give. So while I was in China and in general abroad over the last 15 years, I've obviously noticed that the politics has become much more divisive between the left and the right. And, all these shootings and all this nonsense going on, especially within the last, 10 to 15 years. So I figured if I came home, if I went out to meet random people, politics would come up quite a lot, or that there'd be these heated arguments and stuff. And actually, it hasn't really been a big deal. I haven't really had these discussions. I mean, I could tell the way people probably feel, and I could slightly talk about certain things. But otherwise, I obviously don't bring that up. Because that can be really annoying, because when I went to Europe 20 years ago, it was right when the U.S. was about to invade Iraq in 2002, 2003. And so everyone there was just talking about America and how much they hated it, basically. And so, that was a different time, too, because I was 22 years old, and I'm much more around college-age kids. So college-age kids are obviously much more into the political things and much more sensitive, where now a lot of the people I'm hanging out with are 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So people feel certain things, but it's not like everyone's going to blow up and get super excited. So that hasn't been that big of a deal. Yes, there are shootings around in Denver and other places. I haven't seen any crazy things. Actually, there's a lot of car theft here too. I was a little nervous moving downtown. I haven't heard of anything happening in these apartments that I've talked to people and asked them, but so hopefully nothing happens. The other expectation and surprise is that I assumed I would have gotten jobs a little easier. As I mentioned, 6 months before I left, I started trying to get all these remote jobs, and even the jobs, just to be an online English teacher was difficult. I made these videos and did all this, I've taught for 15 years, and I couldn't even really find many jobs for that. So that was another big surprise. And that's something you got to think about when you come home. Even if you apply before you go home, it's kind of difficult because you're not living in that town. You're in China or overseas, and people might want you to come in for an interview and you can't do that. Or obviously you probably don't have the local phone number. Now you can go on Skype and get a phone number for the area code you want. So I got mine for Buffalo, but it's still not as convenient as being at home and applying from home at a residence. I've generally liked it more than I thought. I thought, I might get back and be itching to go right away. I might get back a few months and I'll be it's not going to work out, and I'll just go to, I don't know, Vietnam and teach, or go to Peru or whatever. And it's been pretty good. I mean, part of that's because, I don't have the money to really travel as much as I want, so it's not even really a big option. But it's been pretty cool coming back. I mean, there's a lot of good things to be said about the States, too. I mean, there's great music scene and tons of stuff to do. In China, there's not a big live music scene. They've got DJs doing stuff and some electronic, but definitely not great for that, or amazing festivals. So being in the States, downtown Denver has a ton to do. You've got places like Meow Wolf, this huge, crazy artistic building with all these different rooms. And I'm right near Rhino Art District, which is just a 7-minute walk away. And that's got a bunch of cool bars and cool murals in all the buildings. Obviously, downtown's got a million other bars and places to go to see live music and comedy shows and stuff. So I haven't even scratched the surface for the most part. Obviously, it's so expensive, you can't go out much. So you've definitely got a budget. Being in China, I could go out and drink and go out to eat all the time because it's so cheap. But Here, you're definitely going to have to budget. I did make a video on how you could try to live on like around $1,000 a month or cheaper in general. You can check out that video if you want for some advice. But you're going to have to make like $4 or $5 grand a month to make it by. If you get your own place and have a car and pay insurance and all this stuff, like it's just crazy expensive, which of course I knew that coming back. That was the biggest minus coming back, is the super high costs. It's like 3 times as expensive as it was like when I lived here 15 years ago before I left. And of course, not just Denver, but there's tons of stuff to do in the mountains, obviously biking and hiking. There's tons of outdoor groups, like you go on meetup.com or Facebook groups, and there's people every day going out hiking and biking, other activities. So, are all of those group meetups super cool and amazing people? Not always, sometimes it's kind of mediocre, but you just got to try, and eventually you'll meet some friends. Especially if you're middle-aged or a little older, it's not going to be as easy as meeting friends. Like in China, and when you're abroad, everyone can make friends easily because everyone's kind of in the same boat. You're this small group living abroad for adventures. You're not going to find your like perfect best friend. You'll hang out with any kind of random person, and even if you're not like a perfect match, you'll still go out and have beers or whatever. And so here, you'll have to make more of an effort. And luckily, I'm really social, so that's not that hard for me. And I've luckily met a few friends now, and it's getting better. But yeah, that's definitely not going to be as easy. And like I said, the average person here, it's not like they're like, oh, wow, you lived in China. That's so amazing. Or even if you traveled abroad, the average person, maybe they're more interested in like the Broncos or hockey or, the news or things going on in life here. So don't expect everyone to be so flabbergasted at your amazing travels. Some people might be interested, but it's not going to be the majority, so just get used to like more regular small talk and making things in common with things like, TV shows and sports or whatever. And it's too bad too, because before COVID, a few years ago, a lot of people still had a positive impression of China. Obviously, that's gone. So it used to be like I tell people, oh, I live in China, I do tours in Tibetan areas. And people are like, wow, that's awesome. You get more people. Now people are like, almost no one's interested in China. I'm not even getting any emails for the most part. I still have the same website, and I was trying to sell other companies' tours, and I've only gotten 1 or 2 emails, which were mostly just getting advice or a question, but I haven't sold 1 tour to another country, so that country's tourism's dead, unfortunately. The other great thing is that you can read everything and understand people. Obviously, abroad, it's difficult to communicate with people and read menus in Chinese. So, you could go and you could read everything. You could talk to people easier. Now, sometimes that sucks because, I don't always want to have small talk with people and things. But generally speaking, it's pretty nice. It's also new for me to live downtown because I've lived in big cities abroad, but I've actually never lived in a bigger city in the United States. I've been in the suburbs, or I was in college in Boone, or in Fayetteville, or even in Asheville. So now I'm walking distance downtown. So this kind of a new experience for me, and I think I hopefully enjoy it for another year or two or whatever. So that is a good question. How long is it until I do get bored? Well, so far, it's been a pretty eventful year, mostly just because I'm trying to survive and it's been really challenging. I imagine living downtown will be pretty fun for about another year, and then I might start to get an itch. I hopefully will go traveling for at least a few weeks this winter. I was hoping to do like a whole big motorcycle trip from like Mexico City to Peru. And now that I have my own apartment and all these bills, like I think it's going to be a pretty short trip. So, which brings me to another point. I don't even know how this channel is going to go. I like giving advice like this, but I also want a lot of cool adventures, like motorcycle trips, going up to high peaks. And like now it's just going to be so hard to save to be able to travel. So hopefully things work out for me, but I'm not even sure. I might even have to get another job. I might even do like a blue collar job, like learn more about electrical and take a job like that in the day if these tours don't work out. And then if I do my own business, eventually I can still travel and do stuff, but it's definitely tough times. I had even looked into other things like doing IT, like the digital nomad, but they're laying off a lot of those guys lately. So it doesn't seem like a good time to get into that market. So it could be the blue collar job might be the best thing because, you could do that in other cities anyway. It's pretty much universal. Obviously nothing I could do abroad. Like I'm not going to be an electrician in Peru or Mexico, but in the States it pays pretty well. And that's another thing to consider too. Like I was just in the suburbs the last few months. I mean, it's pretty boring. There's a couple bars that are okay that have good live music, but crowds out in the suburbs are usually the empty nesters, so they're usually 50 and up. You have definitely some nice people and stuff, but in the suburbs, you don't really talk to your neighbors too much. It's great to be downtown and you could walk to a lot of places and not worry about drinking and driving. So if you're a pretty social person, I would do your best to try to live in somewhere in a pretty cool area that's somewhat trendy or interesting. I wouldn't really live in the suburbs. I think it kind of sucks. I mean, in China, I could go out anywhere, and even if I didn't live in the coolest area, I could get a cheap taxi somewhere. But if you're in the suburbs here, it's like 50 or 75 bucks back. And it's already expensive to go out, so I would definitely live downtown if you could. I haven't really done too much dating since I've been back because I'm just in survival mode and I didn't even have my own place until a week ago. So occasionally if I meet some interesting people, I might ask some people out, but I'm guessing that it's still obviously a little better abroad because you have some of the local women you could date, and then there's a lot of other foreign women that you could date, so I'm sure it's a little better being abroad, but at this point in my life, it's not the main focus, so like obviously 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, it's such a big focus. And now once you get to middle age, you're just more concerned with money. And if the ladies come, they do. And if not, that's okay too. I'll survive. So the biggest culture shock in many ways, the job market could be tougher than you think. So I would start to consider what you're going to do when you're coming back. I mean, if you're a teacher, that's probably what you could do. I also did a tour guide company, so I could get tour guiding jobs. I didn't really find anything outside of that. I mean, maybe I could cut grass for someone. Even the restaurants, I emailed a couple restaurants and I was like, oh, maybe I'll get a dishwashing or a busboy job. Like, they didn't need anyone. So yeah, I mean, fast food are like the worst jobs, but any decent company, I don't think it's easy to find jobs. So that's another reason why you should look at some of these digital nomad jobs. Whether I don't know if you do drop shipping or sell things online or IT, I don't know what, but if you're just a teacher, I mean, you could go back and do that if you like it, but if you don't like teaching, I mean, you're going to be really starting over. The only good thing about China is that I had the experience doing tours. It gave me the confidence to start my own company. And so I've been able to at least make part of my living that way for now, but otherwise, man, it's a big deal to start over. I would start training and do things a year or two before. And then, of course, just have a bunch of money saved. I mean, of course, I had not a ton of money, but a big chunk of money saved. That was basically my restart money. And of course, that asshole stole all my money. And so, yeah, and of course I wouldn't do business or ever give money to a Chinese person. Like, there's like a 90% chance they'll steal your money. Like, their culture is just so messed up between the mixture of like communism and capitalism and like Confucianism and like if someone's bigger than you, it's okay to cheat, that kind of idea. Like, there's just so many ways in which they can view theft as okay, in my opinion. So I've got other videos on that subject. I don't want to go in there, but yeah, obviously super bitter about them taking away like what would be a year in rent or a year of travel or like much less stress. As I mentioned, the stuff about your credit and driving history is gone. So you've got no credit history according to most people. At least it's not recent. It's going to be a hard time getting a credit card. You might have to have like your parents or someone co-sign with you to get a credit card, and that'll be tough to get any loans if you're going to try to buy a car or something like that. And then also your insurance rates are going to go up because you're like a 16-year-old driver. You have no history that's recent, so you're going to start off paying quite a lot for your insurance. But then also these days it's different because back in the day you just got liability. You could just get the basic insurance because everyone on the road had insurance. So if someone hit you and it's their fault, they pay. Now, like half the people don't have insurance. So if someone hits you and you don't have collision and full coverage, you're going to lose the car if it's a bad accident or if it gets stolen or if, I see a lot of parked cars that just drunk drivers hit them in the winter and different times. So you're going to also have to pay for full coverage. So that's going to be a bigger expense than you probably anticipated. So other things to consider, as I mentioned, I would consider looking to like these blue collar jobs, learn to be an electrician or something. When you come home, you could always do that. And if you want to do something that you find more fulfilling, great. But some of those jobs, at least you could do it anywhere and you could go into business for yourself and that could be better for you. Otherwise, yeah, if you don't want to be a teacher, you're not going to have a lot of options. So it's going to be tough to start over. if you don't have any plan. Some other recommendations. I didn't have a big savings over the years, generally speaking, especially at the beginning, because I was traveling and kind of making it by. If I could have did it again, and I was talking to my friend about this, it's probably good to like look into real estate or some way to invest some of your money where like you could either sell it later or rent it to make some money, or even get like a duplex or a situation where like you could even live in part of the house when you come back home, because now it's super expensive to get real estate and it's gone up so much. That would have been a huge investment. I mean, I could have gotten these like kind of mediocre ghetto homes in like Cleveland or Buffalo for like 10 or 20 grand, remodel it over the years and rent it out. And, you know, maybe at first just a few $100s and you get like $1,000 a month. And now I got a buddy of mine who's in Colombia, and that's what he's doing. He's just renting out his house and then he just lives in Colombia. So if I could have did it again, I would have saved enough to at least try to get at least one rental or something like that. And so another thing to expect in life in general, maybe not just coming home, but you just have to expect the worst, unfortunately. I can't say my life's horrible or anything. I've been really lucky to be able to travel the world, and I've got good social skills and work skills, and I was able to get through school and all this stuff. But I've also been surprised at how many things haven't worked out or how many unusual obstacles. Like, I knew coming out to Colorado would definitely be tough with either competition or getting permits for parks. I didn't think I'd have to, like, get into hearings with my competitors and be like, so do you have a business plan to do this? Why do you think you should do tours here? Like, I'm in communist China. So, man, there's a lot of adversity out there, and a lot of things don't work out quite as well as you might think. I know in my 20s, I mean, I was just optimistic. Like, I'm going to travel and everything's going to work out, and I'm going to write this cool book, and then I'm going to go to Alaska and I'm going to make a bunch of money. And like, you know, I got ran over a few months into the trip. I tried to write a book, but I didn't find any literary agent that wanted it. I should have actually started this social media years ago. I had videos of everything. But instead I was like, oh, I'll try to do the writing thing. So now I'm doing everything reverse now, trying to get the social media up and then sell books later. You know, it wasn't that I necessarily made horrible mistakes. I mean, a lot of it was bad luck. Like, I didn't think the pandemic was going to happen. Now, did China go in the direction that could have happened? Sure. I wasn't that surprised it went that way. I figured it was actually just going to stay about the same. Like, it was going to be a communist government, but they'd at least change leaders occasionally. But yeah, they went full North Korea, so quite a bummer. But we'll see. Maybe things work out here. So what are my predictions in the next year? As far as that case goes, I don't know. Maybe a 50-50 chance or less I'll win. It seemed like that judge was pretty... I wouldn't say she's on my side, but it seemed like through her body language and stuff, like she kind of wanted me to win, and she didn't look like she was too happy with the other guys who like didn't even have any documents for the hearing. Like, they just kind of showed up, and of course they didn't read or look at anything, and they're like, oh, can I submit a document now? Like, they should have had that, 3 weeks before. And so I had all my documents and stuff in at least. There's a tiny chance I'll win. If not, can I still do tours? Yes. I could still get this like off-road permit where I could take people to many of these hiking areas or biking or even walking tours. I'll try to learn like this 5 Point area I live, which was an African-American district back in the day. It still is, but it's more gentrified. So I'll try to do some more walking tours now that I live downtown. And then I'll keep this English teaching job in the evening for, probably another year at least. And yeah, I'll probably get some repeat customers next year. Technically, if I had a great start, for the most part, like even despite being restricted, I should be able to have a viable business. But we'll see. I might be just doing electrical work for a company. I really don't know. But I'll have to give it at least another year. And I guess 2024, at some point I'll see where I'll go from there. I imagine I'll just stay in Denver and just try to ride it out. I do really like it here. There's a lot to do, and I can still travel outside the country and do some cool things. So anyway, I'll do another video about how my court case goes with the tours company and the transportation. It's just ridiculous, but it's good for people to know that because, yeah, if you come out to Colorado and think you could just drive people around and do tours, sorry. You could get blocked, and I learned the hard way. I'll also do another video of how I compare my life today, like middle-aged, compared to when you're 23. So kind of the pros and cons of being, younger or middle-aged. I think they're both kind of even out. Like, I think there's a lot of good things about being middle-aged compared to being out of your mind in your 20s. Just constantly want to get drunk and bang chicks and just having too much energy, to be honest. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below. And if you enjoyed, subscribe and like it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.